Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are jumping right into a massive topic that sits right at the heart of Canadian politics. We're talking about Western alienation and the whole equalization formula. You know, it's one of those subjects usually buried under heavy emotions and, frankly, incredibly complex math. But our goal today? We're going to decode a recent interview featuring economist Tanner Hnidey, and we'll break down the historical origins and the economic mechanics cleanly, clearly, and impartially.
Okay, let's dive right in by tackling a huge misconception that our source highlights right out of the gate. Look, when people debate the billions of dollars flowing between the provinces and Ottawa, there's this persistent myth that Alberta basically pulls out a checkbook and writes a massive, giant check directly to Quebec. But, as we'll see, while the financial imbalance is very real, that kind of direct province-to-province transfer, it's absolutely not how the system actually works.
So, to map this all out, we've broken it down into 5 key parts. We'll start with the equalization enigma, then explore the origins of provincial dependence. Look at the formula comparing oil and hydro, hit the constitutional roadblock, and finally examine the case for independence. Let's get to it.
Section 1. The equalization enigma, what it is and what it isn't.
Now, the absolutely crucial point here, according to Hnidey, is that this system doesn't actually measure regional poverty. Nope, it measures a province's capacity to raise tax revenue. Introduced in its modern form by Lester B. Pearson way back in 1967, it basically asks a hypothetical question. If every single province taxed its citizens at the exact same standard rate, how much revenue would they generate? If a province falls below the national average in that revenue-generating ability, well, they receive equalization payments. So it's not about who struggles to pay rent, it is strictly about government taxation power.
Moving right along to Section 2. Origins of provincial dependence. A historical look at centralization. To really grasp why this system exists, Hnidey argues we have to look back to Canada's founders, who intentionally centralized lucrative taxes in 1867 with the British North America Act. They gave the heavy-hitting taxes, things like customs and excise, to the federal government while handing the really expensive administration of public goods down to the provinces. Why? Well, to force the provinces to rely on Ottawa. This dependency deepened during the Great Depression when federal funding was essentially framed as a matter of national security. Fast forward a bit, formal equalization is introduced in 1957 to keep richer provinces from breaking away. It gets refined by Pearson in 1967, and then it's permanently locked into the Constitution in 1982.
In this quote right here, it brilliantly illustrates the core historical thesis from our source. The structural design of Canada wasn't actually about eradicating individual poverty. According to the source, Ottawa's original and ongoing goal was to ensure no province could ever become so financially independent that it would fracture the nation. It's a system explicitly built, from the ground up, to hold a vast country together through pure financial reliance.
Section 3. The formula. Oil versus hydro. Comparing resource calculations.
Okay, this is where the modern grievance really takes shape. The source juxtaposes 2 very distinct provincial moneymakers, Alberta's oil and Quebec's hydroelectricity. Because oil is classified as a non-renewable natural resource, the equalization formula captures 50% of Alberta's oil revenue when it calculates the province's overall wealth. But Quebec's hydro? It's classified as a public utility. And what does that mean? It means only the corporate taxes on Hydro-Quebec's profit are counted, completely ignoring the massive underlying resource revenue itself.
So what does this actually mean in practice? Well, the source argues this fundamental disparity places a hugely disproportionate burden on oil-producing provinces. Alberta's oil wealth is highly visible to the formula. That shoots them way above the national average, making them totally ineligible for equalization payments. Meanwhile, because hydro is excluded from natural resource calculations, Quebec is legally allowed to obscure its true revenue-generating capacity. Hnidey points out that this loophole essentially allows recipient provinces to look much poorer on paper than they actually are in reality.
Which brings us to Section 4, the constitutional roadblock, why reform is highly unlikely.
Now, you might be wondering, why don't they just change the formula? Well, according to the source, fixing this isn't just about passing a quick new bill in Parliament. Equalization was enshrined in the 1982 Constitution by Pierre Trudeau, essentially locking it in forever. To reform it, you literally need a constitutional amendment. And the catch here is massive. Recipient provinces, including Quebec, hold veto power over those changes. As Hnidey notes, the chances of recipient provinces voluntarily voting to cut their own guaranteed federal funding, they're absolutely zero.
Let's look at Section 5, the case for independence. The source's economic conclusion.
Just take a second to think about this staggering number. The source emphasizes that Alberta has contributed a net outflow of over $600 billion to Ottawa since the 1960s. $600 billion? And what's absolutely crucial to note here is that despite this massive contribution, Alberta hasn't received equalization payments in over 60 years. Even during severe economic downturns, like the brutal crashes in 2015 and 2016 when Albertans were deeply hurting, the formula still dictated that they had a higher capacity to tax than places like Nova Scotia, which meant exactly zero financial relief flowed back into the province.
Ultimately, Hnidey argues that this current system actively punishes wealth creation. The source suggests that with guaranteed funds flowing in, regardless of actual resource development, recipient provinces basically have zero incentive to become self-sufficient. Because Alberta carries this massive economic freight for the nation with no realistic hope of constitutional reform, the speakers firmly conclude that Alberta would be far more prosperous and would truly thrive economically as an independent nation standing on its own.
So we've mapped out how an 1867 vision for centralization evolved into today's deeply controversial equalization formula. After exploring the source's breakdown of the history and the economics, we want to leave you with this final thought. Does this financial structure successfully bind a massive country together, or do its structural imbalances actively push it apart? It's a fascinating question, and one that for sure will continue to shape the very future of Canada. Thanks for joining us for this explainer, and we will see you next time.